Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Skip Conover, and I'm the founder of the Carl Jung Psychology Reading Group. But for the last 45 weeks or so, we have been focusing on the Tarot as a roadmap for life. And fortunately, during this summer, Nick Lawrence has offered to organize a mini-series on this topic. And so, Nick, over to you without further ado. Thank you for being here tonight.
Of course. Thank you, Skip. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another installation of this mini-series over the course of the summer that we're calling Tarot Permutations. We've been looking at the major arcana and the relationships between different cards in the major arcana. Several weeks ago, I established a couple of different methods of comparison. I called some of them the numerological method, the astrological method, so on and so forth. And over the course of the summer, we've just been establishing different relationships between 2 to 3 to maybe even as many as 4 cards, and then just having some conversation on that. So the idea with this mini series is to establish the relationship and then consider whether or not it's a particularly fruitful relationship or not. I've made the analogy several times, and I guess I'll make it again. Imagine all of the tarot cards are at a dinner party together with one another, and say 2 cards come up and start conversation with one another. Do they have enjoyable conversation and really get on well with one another, or do they have tense and unenjoyable conversation and want to terminate the conversation very quickly? So with that in mind, tonight, Gilda KO is going to give a presentation on the cards of her choosing. So without further ado, I will turn it over to her and get her presentation on the screen. Give me just one moment. Okay.
Sorry, Nick, I need to co-host you just a sec.
Okay.
Okay, you should have it now, and I'll make Gilda co-host also.
I'm actually that's okay. I think that I'm going to be doing her presentation off of my computer while she reads some notes of her own.
Okay.
But her being a co-host as well would not be a bad thing.
So would I be reading off the screen or off my notes?
That's up to you.
Off the screen, because I don't. So good evening, everyone. So that's not off the screen. Tonight we're going to experience the number 5 and its different facets. Can you put up the
yeah, whenever you want me to advance to the next slide, just
okay. We're going to discuss number 5 and its various facets of production along the major arcana continuum. By production, we are referring to 5 movements or active processes of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, which yield an X yet unknown 5th pivoting activity. These movements are detectable by function a lot of the times and on autopilot. In everyday life, ongoing, we engage our reason, evaluating our next thought, our next step, and our next action. We're going to explore a key word for the number 5 number card, the Hierophant. In its numerical multiples and also in its numerical multiples across the major arcana. We have designated a word key that in ways unknown to us colors the 5 card in its multiples across the progression of the majors. This word can be a noun and a verb. The word is pivot. And we are going to explore its effects on the 5s. Next. Pivot as a noun is a central point, pin, or shaft on which a mechanism turns or oscillates. So when we experience number 5, it's time to create a shift. A person or thing that plays a central part in an activity or organization. The person or people about whom a body of troops wheels. A player in a central position in a team sport. In basketball, a movement in which the player holding the ball may move in any direction with one foot while keeping the other foot, the pivoting foot, in contact with the ground of being or the floor. So imagine the Hierophant. He can move in any direction, but he keeps a connection to the ground's being. As a verb, we activate the above movements in small ways all the time and in big ways intermittently throughout our life. Example, within the sketch of Kabbalah, which includes a structural method, we can activate the cards using numerical associations, as with theosophical reductions, where one adds 1 plus 5, the devil card, and reduce it to a single digit, 6, the lovers. These two cards then become related. The late occultist Oswald Wirth has an entire system based on theosophical reductions, and it's quite fascinating. Here we're going to multiply instead of reduce. Another available portal to address the tarot is to activate a movement via our intuitive function. Meaning, once we have become acquainted with both paths, intuitive, unbound, cosmic, receptive, and the logical structural mapping we might use in order to move us from point 5 to our next step, which become like puzzles and methods, which can teach us to follow a how-to procedure, like the ancient Kabbalah, the Golden Dawn, etc. Making a note of these movements allows a natural integration to become available while deciphering the card's next step. An indisputable pioneer of last century's modern movement, poet Ezra Pound, born in the U.S. in Idaho, though he lived most of his life abroad in Europe, tried to coin these very alive synchronistic movements as I have above described. For example, he coined the word periplum, a point of view of one standing in the middle of a journey. Ezra insisted on making a distinction between his own feelings and ideas and that which is already objectively present with form and structure. This is to say, to allow the presence of being, space, to access getting in touch with unknown variables seeking address, which is actually what we do when we do readings with a tarot. We don't want to know what we already know. We need to know what we don't know. So by allowing this space for something to arrive and being aware of it is a way of hijacking this. For example, another way of encountering the unknown, he states, is by catching the character one happens to be interested in. At the moment, the character interests us. Right there. Pause, acknowledge. Right as it's coming online. It is a type of improvisation like playing jazz. I would say that he also said something like an intellectual emotional complex in an instant of time. An instant, and then you take that instant and pause and notice its various parts, and then something else happens. This type of synchronicity often sheds light upon truth-bearing soulful material. For example, a sudden understanding or revelation the moment you select a card. At that very instant, you make a distinctive note of your feelings, how you feel in your body. Your body always tells you. Then identify the ideas coming forth, etc. By using this separation, the activity of dividing, intuitive thoughts have space to arrive and connect the dots in new and novel ways. So now we've experienced multiplying and dividing. Next, so we're working with the concept of pivoting, multiplying, dividing, adding, and subtracting. This intuitive psychic hijacking is often what it takes to manifest a previously unknown pivoting shift. Card number 5 and its multipliers alert us that something needs to create a shift. Card number 5, the Hierophant, and the multiplying numbers, again divisible by 5, offer pivoting stops connected to human time. So they are connected to time, is connected to the being and other. So that's why it's a shifting, because it involves several aspects, not just one step one needs to take. So we call this a mature card. This is to say, the major arcana 5 and its multiples offer us a type of movement to either take the next major step in a bite size, or most likely that a full swing shift is in the offing. A shift differs from a step in that one has the quality of embodying a transformation. Something becomes embodied, not just superficial thoughts coming and going. A revelation relating to Pound's poetic work says, an epic poem which begins in the dark forest, crosses the purgatory of human error, and ends in the light and among the masters of those who know. So to be a master of those who know, that space of separation for something else to come in is required. Otherwise, we are already full and our intuition cannot access our daylight awareness. In my estimation, this quote encapsulates a short sentence and overall experience found when using the tarot as a roadmap of engagement. And to a great extent, the 5 and its multipliers spur us onwards into major shifts in our life. And since tarot is a tactile handling game or processing game using the hands, coupled with the possibility of chance, when selecting a card, it would behoove a practitioner to verse and experience him or herself at a starting point anywhere in the sequence of numerical events. Hence why I chose 5. Is somewhere in the continuum. It's not starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's already 5. So it has some experience, it has some history, it has a lot of things to work with. We'll be exploring the phenomena of the 5, which we are calling a pivoting number. Next. The 5 embraces an action that must move from the personal to include a complex collective, either outer as in the world or inner as in your psychic and body complex. It is a more mature number than 1 through 4. 1 through 4 are more intimate, personal numbers that help us develop up to a certain platform where we are able to, like a mother teaches a bear to go hunting until he's able to do it on his own. So 1 through 4 are the training wheels. By the time you get to the 5, you are already there. And whatever ensues requires mature shifting for it to be transformative. So it can either be, the shifting can be in the psyche, intuitive, subjective, inside our macro programming operative. Our body knows a lot. Our body has functions that are absolutely incredible. Or a relocation in the community and outward movement. We keep in the state, the country we inhabit, the planet we live in, the galaxy, the objective complex we project ourselves into during our daily experience, during our lifetime, etc. One is inner, one is outer. And we are accessing that in-between space where both are present. The tarot formation complex, and especially under the Alive Kabbalah illuminated diagrams, utilizes numbers to make sense of available perception within its contained matrix of possibilities. This is to say, the availability and consequences of adding, multiplying, dividing, and subtracting. We are constantly doing this, whether we know it or not. These movements provide a nothing open space, zero, or the fool, to come to life and function, skipping and hopping, or walking and riding vehicles, flying about, unbound across a time continuum, as we find in some of the more modern decks. We can harness to help us traverse in real time our course in existence. Next. We're getting there. Here we are. We are
Okay.
arriving at the pictures.
I think now, before we move into the cards, might be a good time to stop and
Any questions?
and see about questions, comments, anything like that. And if nobody else has anything, I do have a couple. Jordan, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I love that, Gilda, that you brought in Ezra Pound, especially in regards to process, and that one point in the middle of the context of the process. It's kind of synchronous. I saw a quote this morning that said, "Fall in love with the masterpieces, but also the paint on the floor." And that really, to me, kind of synced up with your going into Ezra Pound's philosophy in that short, concise quote. So that struck a chord to resonate with me.
Mhm. Right. Ezra Pound tried to do with poetry, which is words, the same thing that jazz musicians have done. So it was all synchronistic. And the point being is that the rhythm of interpretation is not bound by a matrix underneath. It is here and now available. And that's what we access right here, that is available. And it can go in any direction, like a mandala. It's not bound linearly by the progression of numbers. It is like a mandala. It can move in any direction, exactly like jazz. And that's where we're using here the same point by going from 5 to the Hierophant to 10. So there's a space in between the 5 and the 10. And 15, there's a space between 15 and 20. So there's this space in between where steps can be taken. But the 5, the 10, the 15, and the 20, as we shall see, are mature, shifting, pivoting numbers.
Right. And Ezra Pound, too. I like that you brought up jazz with his work, because his work, even when he used form or meter or even some internal rhyme, it was more experiential than it was him utilizing the form. The form happened to be the shape it took, but he didn't really typically start with that. It was more of I can't call it stream of consciousness, because it's elaborate and it's also very specific, but it's very experiential, like jazz.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so therefore, something new always arises, because it's also always in the process of becoming. And that's what we explained the other day, that the present doesn't really exist. It's always in the process of becoming. So
Right.
when we check the cards and we find these images are in the process of becoming something, which they become something because we are present. And so at the moment we are present, that is how it becomes something. So that moment is if you can capture that moment and hijack that moment, then all the stuff starts coming in.
Right.
So yeah.
Gilda, can you say something about 5 times 5 though?
Yeah, sure, I can. We only went up to 5 times 4. We didn't go to 5 times 5, but because the tarot most time goes up to 21 in the major arcana, but we fancy that 25 is probably at some point in time maybe a better, more complete major arcana, whether we introduce 3 more, such as charity, hope, and faith, or as whatever. by the time it gets to 25, the 5 is facing itself. Okay, it's a mirroring face of the self, and therefore facing yourself without love, charity, and faith, it's a destructive modality. So by that time, those higher functions of being, such as love, charity, and faith, love is already in the Lovers, a case of charity, faith, and hope, or some other word, needs to be, it's an elevated form of enlightenment. You're enlightened, you are present to your highest and lowest possibilities of being, because you're facing yourself directly.
And
It's,
25 wouldn't correspond to any particular minor arcana card because of it being beyond the major arcana?
Well, once you get to 25, you're back again to 5 times. If you're doing the multiplication, which I'm using, you will be doing, you then 5 times, you did 5 times 5, but then again, you have 5, 2, 2, 5, which equals a 7, and then you can play that other game. Okay, you go back to the 7 and the chariot and so on. But if you just use the point of locus of the 5, by the time you elaborate 5 times 5, you can say you have, you're adding 1. 5 is facing itself.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yes.
And 5 divided by 5 is 5 times, you know, so it's facing itself. So that seems like a more complete, in my, you know, it may be, I can't verify or deny, but by the time one faces oneself, which is beyond, let's say, judgment, as we will see, and 21, the mirror is turned to you, to face you exactly as your projection is not out there in the sky as in judgment, and your reflection is, you are both. You are the projection, the reflection functioning at one. By the time, if you do 5, you're facing yourself. Does that answer your question?
Yes, very much so. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Great.
Very specific. Thank you.
Thank you. So here we have the Hierophant, and we have further. I don't know if you wrote some more before we start examining the cards. Is there more after this?
Yeah, if I may, I did just have a few questions I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
Or rather just some requests for clarification. On this slide here, when you say this intuitive psychic hijacking is often what it takes to manifest a previously unknown pivoting ship, I'm wondering if you can say something more about that, or if there's some different language that you could potentially use.
Okay. You're hijacking the empty space with your attention. If the person is busy accessing a matrix that they already know, like this means that because they know, they memorized it from a method, they will go there and move around in that matrix. So they're not hijacking anything. They're simply following maps that they have already faced and are familiar with to some extent. That's why they're going there. So by allowing, when the meeting takes place of the card and the reader, by allowing that separation or division to occur, where, you know, I got a twitch here, or my heart is fluttering, or, you know, and my intuition, it's suddenly buzzing something. The space is opened for something to come in, and at that moment you catch it. And that's what I mean by hijacking. You catch it, and then by doing that, something's new. And then that catching something new will move you in the next direction. It's not, in my estimation, learning methods, it's only there, methods, it's related to tools that we're still seekers because we need tools because we can't do it ourselves. But at some point, our self has all the tools. And this is a form of hijacking that that masterful place where once you're there, you probably wouldn't, you're doing the cards for someone else or something, but you don't need it any longer because you are already tuned to that confluence that allows you to know your next step and allows, and you've been busy there so you can make shifts in your life, which clean you up and help you be more integrated inwardly. When one is inwardly completely integrated, they cannot not be integrated outwardly because it will reflect that way. It will project that way because that's the only thing there is in there.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I'm hearing is you saying there's something about facilitating an openness to insight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Pause is so by pausing and then examining how you feel, and you examine both the feeling and the objective reality. You pause, but you're not making any distinctions or definitions. You're just pausing, and then your inner being has intelligence. It will allow you make something will surface, and it's usually we call it a lot intuition, but it's probably more radical and involved than that. Once you start clearing all the veils, but intuition is good enough for now, meaning something that your whole body is resonating with, and no one has said, "Oh, may that be?" You have a knowing, and when you get in touch with this knowing in your body, you have you. It's like when you know something, when something is revealed to you, and you go, "Oh yeah," or aha moments. You just know. At that moment that you receive that aha, you don't say, "Oh, I don't think it's true," or "Could it be something else?" Or you're there, and it is so. So that's the point where if we can get there, that's ideal for, and it can start anywhere. So that's what I mean. It doesn't. That's why I chose just number 5, because we can be anywhere in the continuum, and experience continuity, experience the best next step, and experience the next best shift. It's not necessarily a numerical progression. Numerical progressions are there to help us when we need help in guidance.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. I was just a little bit confused by the language and thought it might be helpful for others to hear.
So is that clear, or did I confuse it more?
I mean, I think it's clear enough. I was just confused about the language because for me, when I read like psychic hijacking, it just kind of, to me, confuses me a little bit because I wonder who's the hijacker, who's the hijacked.
Oh, you're hijacking the what's entering from a place that you are not in the lead to know. You're not in the lead. It comes because you are connected to something. So that hijacking, but I use the word meaning because you need to catch it. If you don't catch it, and you're not open you can't take it to the next movement. It will just pass on by, like thoughts pass on by, and you don't do anything with them.
I'm curious, we don't have to spend a lot of time or maybe any time on this, but what's the connection between this Ezra Pound guy and Dante Alighieri? Because what you write here in the dark forest is a line from Dante's Commedia, and purgatory, purgation ends in the light. That's all Dante.
Well, it was a review on his work, and this quote is in the review of his work that he says in the dark forest. He said this. It means that in the dark forest, meaning when we don't know, we can get agitated and nervous, and things can arise because we're in a point of vulnerability. And a lot of the times, out of fear or whatever it may be, we create errors and we're blind to accessing that point where our intuition, when it has clarity, will assure us through faith or belief or whatever it is, or that we are right on. So we don't access that, then a lot of errors occur. And what else did we say there? And then whatever else I wrote there, and then we move on until, because we've seen it again and again. Eventually, we're either able to make the shifts or not, and when we do, we become masters of our own awareness. We are the master that collectively, with our collective psychic and our intimate individuated one, make the decision. So we are a master. We're not a seeker, we are a finder, and we are integrated enough to have mastership.
Okay. All right. Well,
And Nick, I will say to substantiate what you're saying and help then Gilda's point there as well. Ezra Pound read Dante. He read Dante extensively, so it was very much one of his influences. And so that not only the similarity, there's some places I think where there's some lines that I don't think he stole, that he independently came up with, that are almost identical to Dante, because I think they had a resonance between them as almost an historical friend.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
And I brought all this up because when we will see, when we start in a few seconds, when we get to exploring each card, how this deck was created with reference to how human being can be foolish. So the fool in all is different, how we, without knowing, create all of these situations, and how, if we are paying attention, and the numbers can help us shift in good ways or not. So that's why we actually went this way, interpretation, and chose this deck, which we like very much. And it's from the 1400s.
Okay, you ready to go forward?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
The images are from the 1400s, but the creator of the deck is American. He Brian Williams, he was a Renaissance Italian scholar who was fascinated with tarot, and he often took groups of people in tours to Italy with reference to, studying Renaissance. So this is the Wheel of Fortune, and we will give you details in a moment. We have them written down somewhere. Welcome. When we come to it, see it has a pit on the floor. Okay, so can we move? Well, if we can go to, if there's more text, I'll read it. If not, these are the images that we're going to explore. And we have text next to it that helps us identify what all of them are. But we're going to finish here now. So our attention is also called to, it's not only called to the Arabic numeral marks we have come to identify as our current numerical system, but a precursor in Western civilization, the Roman numerals presented below, in order to explore the angles, points of crossing, and the multiplication of identical marks, alluding to the possibility of furthering dimensionality through the action of multiplying. So here, if we look at these numbers, there's only one line repeated in different ways. The number 5 is one line with the other line making an angle. The other one is the same line on top of another line making an X, a connection. The next one is 3 lines, 2, one on top of each other, and the next one. And Judgment is again repeating 2 lines and 2 lines. So there's a concept of repetition and multiplication of one mark. And that one thing gets seen in many aspects, but it is one mark only. So that I wanted to point that out, how it builds on itself, but it must know itself in order to unbuild what it gets created. Otherwise, when too much multiplication occurs, one gets lost without seeing the one that created all the multiplication. So in the following tarot, we will explore the imagery of the Northern Europeans during the 1400s.
Go back, I'm sorry. Here we go.
In many ways, they sought to display the journey of the soul without yet lending to it the useful methods of numerical values. They were simply going with, their observation of humanity. But as we will see, numerical values are ever present and arise as integral parts of prominence behind human development. So it is a system that is rather complete. It's vast, so we can use it.
Well, I agree with you. I would also encourage any of the viewers at home, if you want to kind of do any exploration on your own with this idea, it's really interesting to arrange the tarot in different orders, just the order that seems right to you or something like that, and see what it does to kind of the overall arc of the cards. It's a really fun little
because what happens is the order of your vision, what you are intaking, changes the order of what you already know. So then suddenly, oh, where are you? Something different. So then you right there's a space. So if you pause, then you have a space to play. And this is a game.
Yeah, and this image that you're giving us of cards without numbers before a certain point, I kind of also have this fantasy of somebody getting a deck of cards and having to figure out the order on their own, which would be interesting meditation.
They'll find all sorts of things. Yeah.
It looks like Jordan may have something he wants to say.
Yeah, I was just going to note that the typo on 11, the devil, would it be 15 XV? And that would be right. more in keeping with what you're saying. I think it might make more clearly right. Because I like that you have the V, but then you cross the 2 lines of the V over to make the X as you slide them together, and then XV is then both of those together. Exactly. And then the second V crosses over itself again to become the second X.
Thank you so much. X, right. And if we were to go to 25, then we would again go back to the V, being another V next to that, right? Correct?
Right.
So you see there's a multiplication, a progression of only one line. And that's how language has been constructed in numbers, in the way we layer things. So if we know how it's layered, we can unlayer and get to the grounds of being.
Well, I think what's nice about that is you basically have brought up active symbology in the Roman numerals to move from one to the next, then additive to go from V to transform to X, and then put X and V together for 15, and then transform the second V the same way to be 2 X's. And then you're making a nice symbolic cartoon of the Roman numerals, which makes the lines more meaningful from I think a remembrance point of view, symbolically.
Right. Thank you for catching that, Jordan. Yes. So when one just looks at that, then suddenly they say, oh, angle. The V is an angle that allows like a container. And then the other one's crossing, like Annabelle was talking the other day, crossroad. Well, this not only a crossroad, this is the same, this is now linked into with a center. So it starts building all kinds of references. So in the following tarot, we'll explore, okay, got that. So next, please, thank you. The Ship of Fools Tarot was developed by Brian Williams. He was an Italian Renaissance scholar, like I mentioned, who passed away in 2002. I believe he lived in San Francisco, and he was very good friends with tarotistas like Mary Greer. So these drawings are almost a direct take and inspiration he reconfigured from Sebastian Brandt's masterpiece of German literature, Das Narrenschiff, or which means Ship of Fools. The woodcut images include some takes by the young, now famous Flemish artist Albert Dürer, made around circa 1494. So we love woodcuts. We think they're very, it has to do with printing, when printing started to come on board. So it has a special way of coming alive, which is also multiplying because you can make more than one. We like printing very much. The author, and Annabelle knows a lot about printing. The author shares in the Ship of Fools tarot book that the Narrenschiff images and literary text accompanying it functions as a kind of encyclopedia of the human soul, with special emphasis on humanity's capacity for foolishness. So that's my point being, is that there's a natural order that occurs in human beings, and they've learned to use numbers to reference that order, or words or marks, but the order exists in and of its own. So this is card number 5, the Pope. In the excerpts from the German literature texts of the decline of the faith. I implore you all, gentlemen, small and great, think of the fate of the common weal, and how it grants me alone the Doom's cap. In this image, the Pope stands to one side in disputatious gesture with the kneeling fool before him, who holds out his cap and seems to be laughing. The two young fools chatter and observe from a high wall. So you might ask me, well, where are the 5? There's 5. This is a 5, right? And if we start counting here, we have 4, right? But then if we look at the place where the 2 walls meet, right below there are the initials of the artist Brian Williams, and that would be the 5th one, who's watching what's going on. So here we have that's the fool and authority. The Pope does have already the aspect of the crown with the 3 shifts, but other than that, he's opened. He doesn't have a shaft in his hand that he utilizes. He's somewhat opened heart in some way to accessing what's troubling this fool. And so it's shifting. Something here needs to shift, a big shift, because he can't go on. He doesn't know. And the ones up there, just, nobody's really on board here with much. Everybody is in the process of doing something. So any questions on this card? It is a different take, I will share, but it's the journey of the fool. Most of the deck is pictorial, and the fool features in just about every card. All the cards, actually. So
the way that I brought up the crossroads last week, and thank you, Gilda, for remembering that, because I think that also relates to the role of poetry in what you're talking about, because that is an image from ballads. And to me, the Elizabethan ballads are interwoven with the timelessness, let's call it, of poetry. But what I see in this card that comes from the ballad tradition is, and this is the line that's often used, two little devils peeped over the wall. And they
okay.
are peeping over the wall. And in the ballad tradition, that wall would be the wall of, that separates our world, let's call it, from the underworld. It's not heaven and our world. The wall is our world and the underworld. And I just wonder, when I look at this, whether there is something about a meeting between the underworld and the Jungian sense, since we are talking, when we talk about the tarot in this ongoing workshop, we are often referencing Jung's interpretation. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying. And it is one way you're acknowledging that there's a definite concrete separation, disallowing the meeting that needs to take place. And also, and you pointed it out very well. And also that this deck has a moralistic underline going around that, the little guy and they all need to meet because they are and all related. These are up high, he's in the middle, and he's below. So it's kind of like the triangle again. Yeah. And so you brought up, there's a concrete wall there separating. There's he's lower than him. He took off his hat where the other one remained. It stands over him with his regalia where he took it off to say, look at me, I'm bare now. What do I do? So it brings up the intervention of a spiritual connection, which is the Hierophant. That it's what connects all the different levels there and the separations that are between them.
Yeah, thank you.
That's wonderful, Gilda. And Annabelle, I'm glad you brought up the ballad tradition with our world and the underworld, because I think Gilda's pointed out something that maybe she's not really highlighting. You mentioned Brian Williams' initials at the bottom, and rather than the connection of the walls, that's a round column because the base is curvilinear. And so in that sense, revisiting your hinge or pivot concept, that ballad wall of the underworld, that the two devils, peeking in, that wall pivoted to then make the Pope, which would be kind of polar opposite in a way of the two devils peeking in. So it feels like that round column with the Brian Williams initialed round base is a pivot of that ballad wall to then bring it into the characters at the front of the scene.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's very nice. Thank you. And also, now that you mentioned that, thank you for helping me out here. Also, the column is empty. It has no form. It's just something going across from top to bottom and just some initials at the very ground of being, but it hasn't developed anything. So therefore it allows for something, the shift to take place, but it's holding up the fort in order for the shift to take place.
I have a question also, Gilda. This is Marilyn.
Hi.
And I'm looking at the kneeling figure and he's barefoot. And very often when someone is barefoot, it's kind of symbolic for standing on holy ground. And I wonder if you might have any thoughts about this.
Well, let's see. I believe that's an interesting connection that I did not necessarily make. I believe that he's barefooted the entire time through all the cards. So that may be why. That he's trying to make, the point being is that he's trying to make that connection.
Thank you.
Make that connection happen. Thank you for your thoughts. Yep, that may be. See, sometimes they did it and they downloaded all of this imagery, and it just so happens that it has also a background story, just like Marilyn just brought in. And I wasn't aware of what being barefoot means. I mean, I know the barefoot Carmelitas nuns and all of other, but I didn't know that it was specifically known for that. But that's perfect. Fits right in. See, it didn't matter that we started at number 5.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point Marilyn brought up. And then I love the way you address that, Gilda, that it goes all the way through, because then the Fool is then making the discernment that it's a life-affirming spirituality, that journey that the periplum is on. And from that Ezra Pound piece, that's a really good observation of on sacred ground. And then the Fool being barefoot pretty much the whole time, it's connected to nature. And then that's a life-affirming spirituality rather than handing over the matter of the body to some other form. It's an infusing of the divine into the form.
Yes, and it's also a refusal to let it go, to let the grounds of being not address the human being. It's a refusal not to let that happen and have a root, a connection to that which gives them life.
Right.
I think I have 2 observations, and they're rather opposed to one another. But on the one hand, there's the biblical tradition of the washing of the feet, and obviously he's approaching a holy place here, so it seems like there may be some connection there. But then on the other hand, there's also just the way in which not wearing shoes on this great journey that the Fool is going on just typifies the Fool's behavior. I don't think that that necessarily detracts from anything that you all have been saying, but it also just seems to be very in character for the Fool to just be journeying through the mountains and everywhere else that he goes and not wearing shoes.
Well, also during that time, shoes were not that easily available.
Yeah.
So if one visit, and I have visited India, and in southern India, a lot of people go barefooted. So I don't know how they do it, but they manage. So it wasn't like you can go get a pair of shoes anywhere. So part of it is, I'm sure, also that since he's a rather holy a fool, a holy being dressed as a fool, showing people what's going on, bringing it to the foreground. The not wearing shoes, it's also helpful. So because if he was wearing shoes and others are not, that are maybe above him a little bit or so, because shoes are not that easily available, then that would create a conflict of his humility. It's like if a non or spiritual being comes to your door and decked out in gold, and that's what happened with Osho, for example, and he never bought it himself. For example, he had 12 Rolls Royce and so on as giving to him as gifts, and that in itself called attention and caused a lot of problems. Eventually, that destroyed the community. So in that sense, maybe the fact that the Fool at that time is shown not wearing shoes also speaks to the humble attitude required in order to be able to put forth the holiness it's trying to point out. We need help, and you need help, and it needs to be addressed, because that is the key to human being.
Yeah, or just to receive it, the position of the hands of the Pope as compared with the hands of the Fool, if we're calling him that, the Fool is more ready to receive, and the Pope is more delivering, you might say.
Mm-hmm. I like it that doesn't have, like in a lot of the later ones, the Pope is sitting with his regalia and has staff. So then a lot of symbology is introduced to mean things, and the humanity aspect is downplayed. So in this deck, the humanity aspect is played in, pretty much.
I would argue for the opposite.
Things
Sorry to be a contrarian, but I'm glad that Annabelle picked up on the gestures being made here, because both the fools, which to me appear to be within the fortress of the Hierophant, but that's just me, but they all are making the gesture of benediction in some form or fashion to this weary traveler who's making a troublesome gesture on his head. And it's not difficult to imagine that he's seeking refuge from his travels, and it's almost as if there's no room at the inn, so to speak.
Well, but it is a kind of bless you, my son, though, isn't it? I mean, that gesture, wouldn't you agree, Nick?
I would agree, but he's standing in the doorway. He's not saying, it doesn't look like he's saying, bless you, I'll take you in, but he's like saying, I hope you find what you're looking for elsewhere.
Well, in
that could just be me. I don't know.
In the here it says that he seems to be laughing, like the fool seems to be laughing. So there is a double entendre within, I am seeking help and I'm humble, but he's also, having a moment of, look at you and look at me and look at them, and, what a comical situation here is appearing when human beings in many ways are the same as the other, in the way that they will die, and they have to go to the bathroom, they have to eat, they share all these things. So there is a proper labeling, saying, but it's kind of, it has not such a beautiful word in it, otherwise I would say it. But yes, so there's also a metaphor here with a sense of humor, calling attention to, see the fools on top do not take off their hat, but he takes off his hat, and neither does the Pope. So he's got he's barefooted, he takes off his hat, and he has kind of a smile on his face. So he's making a point about something that needs to shift.
All right, let's move to the next card, if that's okay with you. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and we're right at the 9 o'clock hour.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, so this is the Wheel of Fortune, card number 10. So notice how when I said things multiply and repeat, and the card number 5 is not only one person, like 1 through 4, that you have one high priestess, one emperor, one empress, one fool, one magician. Here is more than one. You have to deal with other combination. So that's why I call them a pivoting, shifting card. And this is certainly a pivoting, shifting card. So off happenstance, we are warned of the changes in fortune and of the end of power, which recounts how many of the mighty have fallen. So as you can see, part of the literature behind these drawings were trying to point something out that was happening at the time. So there's 2 details in this card that sets it apart from most Wheels of Fortune. That's the thumb-like ditch that opens below the unlucky falling fool. They can fall right there to their death. So, and the handle of the wheel is turned by a cord descending from the hand of heaven. So the way of, instead of displaying time, sometimes fortune, as a woman sitting in the middle, blindfolded or something, predicting time, as time. Here it's got a hand coming from somewhere up there, right? The left, that's moving the time. It's something that is rather ephemeral, but it moves no matter what. So fortune itself, the personification of chance and opportunity, is not present here. Instead, the wheel itself takes center stage, while around it spin lucky or hapless humans and creatures. A donkey-headed fool rises on the wheel's right, another ass presiding from the summit of the wheel, a third figure, a fool who is a donkey below the waist, is falling from the wheel's height. He also, this is from the book. He also mentioned something about Shakespeare, one of these donkeys, or this is related. Shakespeare uses it, something similar in one of his works. So the point being that this couldn't be more shifting. I mean, it is obviously shifting just by looking at it. It's not just taking the next step forward. This is a big shift, and it's big enough that you can die. So, and time, and in this one, we're using an external object, the wheel. The wheel has transformed humanity and civilization. Big, it's huge, right? So here's the wheel, and it's causing civilization to transform. And it's multiplying the Hierophant, because now there's all these players seeking life or death, and time is irrelevant. It's ephemeral. There's no person here saying, "Oh, I can help you." So, yeah. Any questions on this card?
I find it interesting that the one that's half man, half ass or donkey has his hat on, and the other two have that as well, but to cover their donkey ears, but they're back on their necks pulled off. And that's an interesting juxtaposition of the half man, half donkey, and then the two other donkeys. One is half donkey, half man, because it has the feet hanging down. And so you have the half man, half donkey, half man, and then the donkey. And the two with the donkey ears have the masks pulled off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting also that the one on top is not the Sphinx ruling, but is an actual full-fledged donkey. So he is making a statement about being at the top that at some point in time being at the top is, and not adhering to the shifts necessary, you are really a donkey.
Hey, Gilda, could you quickly give us the name of this deck? Somebody in the YouTube chat is asking how they could find it.
Ship of Fools.
Ship of Fools, and it's by Brian Williams, is that right?
Correct. I had put my deck away, my tarot, for, I don't know, 10 years or more, and rarely would look at it. And when I started again, like a year ago or so, inspired by this group, this is the first deck I acquired, and it was inexpensive, and it's one of my very favorites. And it was obscure, not something that most people would get. But we've always loved the art of the Flemish and the northern Europeans in that whole area. And so I thought it was different, and I liked it very much. So we offered it here because it has a interesting perspective that's working right here and right now in humanity's position in the world.
Yeah, it is. I do really enjoy this deck too. It's also funny to me that two of the people that are playing a major role in tonight's presentation, Brian Williams and Ezra Pound, it's almost like in each of them two larger historical figures live, Albrecht Dürer and Dante Alighieri. But I also just want to say, just as an observation, I've always really liked cards that feature this depiction of the Wheel of Fortune, whether it be this one or the Marseille deck, because it's, you know, when you move to the Rider-Waite deck, it's slightly more esoteric version of the card. And, you know, there are no human figures. Well, I guess there's the angel in the card, but even still an angel and not specifically a human. And it's just kind of a perplexing card. And that may be the point. But to me, it conveys what I understand to be the meaning of the card better when it's like you've got animals attached to a will. And I always think about this idea of this being a point in the sequence of the cards of the major arcana where the question is being asked, will you kind of continue with the mere being of which animals live out, just survival, day-to-day, water, food, sleep, that kind of thing, or will you advance on to something greater than that? And to me, that question is asked better in this card in the Marseille deck.
And also a lot of the Italian decks of that era that started coming up, since they were sponsored by the very wealthy, then at the top of the card, they you know, it was always the place you wanted to be, the royalty or the thing, you know, some kind of conquering place. But this is a deck of people. This is a deck of the real, what's really going on. And so it's looking at it perhaps from the bottom up. And from the bottom up, when human beings, even though they have all the riches and everything else, when they don't get in touch with their inner big self with the big S in order to make the decisions and have their impact in the world, then they're no better than a donkey, whether they're on top of the wheel or wherever they are. And at that time, they would kill each other really easily, you know, poison so-and-so, the brother, the sister, and the father. Then at any moment, they could land on that ditch.
Yeah, it's also worth pointing out, you know, the donkey, while it might be a rather lowly animal, or at least that's the general perception, also Dionysus always rode a donkey, and Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey.
So what do you make, what is the point about that?
Well, I just say that because I think the initial thought is that it might be kind of a lowly animal, but maybe not so much. I think they're of a greater stature than they're considered at first glance.
Okay.
Humility.
Well, and also beast of burden. It carries the weight of the world.
That too.
Yeah.
The other thing that I see about this wheel, and particularly because this deck is called the Ship of Fools deck, it looks exactly like the navigation wheel on a big ship. So that it seems as though the nature of this wheel is such that it's actually navigating. So rather than things spinning around, and I was going to ask you about whether there's something about cycles, right? The cycle of the moon, the cycle of the day, cycle of the year, whether that's connected. But it seems like, at least on a superficial level, that this wheel is really about navigating.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I would not have caught that, but that really plays nicely.
Yeah, I didn't catch that either. And that's a really good point, Annabelle, because it has 6 spokes instead of the typical 8. And that is the mariner's navigation ship's wheel.
Exactly.
Right.
All right, so let's move to the next card.
Okay, so here we have the devil, and so we're by times 3, so we keep multiplying the experiences of the fool, that unless major shifts don't take place in each of these stops, then he keeps carrying loads that are very, suffering and everything else. So on finding treasure, he who finds something and takes it as his and believes that God intends it to be so, he has been shut upon by the devil. Here, the fool strains on his leash towards a cache of discovered loot, heedless of the danger of his soul in keeping ill-gotten gains, unconcerned at this bondage to the devil. So again, this deck continues to make commentary on humanity and the state of affairs that was going on at the time. And it's still pertinent. So there's a universal connection to this, to the art and the depiction. So the shift here, if he doesn't realize that he needs to connect and make a big shift, which can go in any direction except the direction of being greedy or acknowledge, following the material, the pursuit of material gain, etc., then he will be choked. He's in big trouble. He still hasn't figured out what kind of shifts he needs to make. So he's caught here by, now this devil is holding something in his hand, which I thought it was something where you blow or make a sound, but I'm not exactly sure. Maybe somebody has. But the fool is still focusing linearly instead of making a shift in order to not. Here he has shoes. Because, well, he's pursuing wealth, so he's got shoes here. What do you know?
And I don't know what's in the devil's hand, but there's the insinuation graphically here of the fool being yoked by desire, pulling on that.
Yeah, all the desires
What's the tool used to stoke a fire? You blow it into a fire.
Is that what? Yeah, that's what it looks like.
The bellows.
Like a bellows?
A bellows, yeah.
It looks like that, and that I think that also, I don't see any flames, but if this guy's
it's almost like
it's not easy to imagine he's fanning the flames somehow,
or inflating him. Or inflating.
Exactly. He seems to be stoking him to keep going. Because he can't see. He's blind. He's not looking at where he needs to be looking. So it looks like the devil is stoking is the word. Yeah, adding flame to the fire, or oxygen to his pursuit.
Like a midair refueling.
Because it's very funny. So this deck also has a sense of humor here and there. And then and he's trying really hard. His face, he's determined, and he's, what progress is he making? He's completely yoked. So and at the neck. So imagine that. So so here again we see that when the shift is not made, there is a price to pay. It's not a progression or an evolution for the particular person, if they cannot, when they get a card like this, is to find what that shift is and to contemplate it until one can embody.
I would be curious to see all of the cards in this deck's major arcana, but since it had such an abundance of Christian symbolism, or I would even go as far as to say it's overtly Christian. It's pretty easy to imagine that some of the more negative cards probably have a lot to do with the 7 the seven cardinal sins of Christianity. And I mean, it seems rather obvious that this one has a lot to do with greed and being a miser.
Mhm. Well, it does, since it's a humanistic deck, it will bring out some of these things.
I guess it's wrong of me to say the cardinal sins. What is it? The seven deadly sins.
Well, you can set seven deadly sins, and then you'd have to couple them because it's a woodcut. Every line is two lines, two incisions at angles. I would say the seven deadly sins, then coupled with the seven virtues. Whereas you get this, and the counterpoint would be freedom rather than miser.
Exactly. So there's always a big mature shift that occurs in all these five multiples of five cards, because five is a pivoting number. There is no going, is not a little step, it's a pivoting that throws you into a complete different, a transformative state. So we can see any other questions, and we'll go to the next one.
I also just want to point out one thing quickly, and it's I usually kind of veer away from this because I just, in my personal and humble opinion, I think it's a slightly trite, but I hear people often talk about this concept of the golden shadow a lot. And, I think that that's probably nowhere more clear than in this card, where this guy is, this is one of the two just undeniably somewhat bad cards, but here there's clearly gold, a hoard of gold here at the bottom of this card. And I would opt to say that about this card, where I would not normally say that.
Oh, yeah, I like that. The golden shadow. Yes, that's very nice. Mm-hmm. Great metaphor. Yeah, the golden shadow. You're not looking, the gold is there, but somehow the way that the fool is going about it is not, he hasn't yet embodied the shift.
Well, and to couple with the golden shadow, then you could also, from a Jungian standpoint, get the light within the dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I suppose it has the opportunity for the shift is there, but it needs to be made. It needs to take place.
I think that Nick's point about the greed is really big in this one, because the fool is moving toward like what's of ultimate value, which is gold, and it's not going to do him any good to covet, to wish to possess, to be desirous of wealth. Any of that is only going to get in his way.
Mm-hmm. Because he hasn't incorporated what he needs to incorporate in order to make the shift.
Right.
I think also to that end, it's really, I'm always reluctant to veer into this, but I think right here it's probably pertinent to bring up the concept of alchemy, because the kind of central idea in all of alchemy is this saying, solve et coagula, or dissolve and bind. Yeah. And people interpret that to mean dissolve the kind of fantasies or ideas that are trapped in kind of material longings, and bind the more spiritual ideas into materiality. And I think that if you talk about the kind of positive and negative end of this card, well, on the negative end, it's like he's looking for something in gold, which is, an incorruptible metal, and, the supreme material value, but also something that ultimately is, meaningless in the end. But at the same time, it's like, if you look at it just from the perspective of fantasy, and you loosen up the fantasy that's inherent in this longing for material gold, it's like you're longing for something that's much more precious than gold.
But
and
he's
will always be elusive. This gold will always be elusive. This sort of tangible manifestation of it is elusive. I mean, I thought also about detachment. I thought about impermanence, and how those Buddhistic concepts are a little bit represented here also, that there's no point in him feeling attached to the value of gold, or to holding on to anything. He has to remain free. I guess that's what it's about, the freedom.
Yes, he has to be connected to his divine qualities in order to be able to utilize that gold in good ways, and he wouldn't be bound. He's bound. He's bound at the neck by the desire.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really funny that around like the 15th, 16th, and 17th century was when alchemy really kind of fell out of vogue for a lot. Well, actually, I think it was probably mostly in vogue then, and then in the centuries that followed that, it really fell out of popularity because people fell into the kind of literalism of thinking that when alchemists wrote about gold, they really meant, oh, we can make gold.
Right.
But I think any real alchemist, to get to kind of the Buddhist point, was, they were using it as a metaphor or an analogy, and that was lost.
Right, the psychic gold. And it's interesting with that psychic gold piece there, then going into Negretto, that's some seriously troubled water behind them. I mean, it's just like a rushing, stormy river, almost like Cloud River, that's behind them, right across the middle of the card.
I had a thought about this too. When I'm looking at it, Gilda, I remember it was mentioned that you created a dance having to do with this. And I'm looking at the figures, they're in such opposition. They cannot be in this posture without being in a dance with each other. So the devil is being pulled by the fool, and the fool is being pulled by the devil. And if one of them let go, they would both collapse on the ground. I wonder if you could speak about the movement, how you see that.
That's a great.
Yes, they are tied to each other. And so there is a dance going on until they wake up and are able to make the shift. Then they will continue playing games. And neither, they're both bound. You can tell they're bound. There's no, their attention is bound. Their activities are bound. They're bound, but neither are going anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a dance, no doubt.
There's a comment in the YouTube channel here that is spurring some insight for me that I think it would be good to mention here. Woody Woo says, I don't feel it's bellows, though. It changes the meaning somewhat. And then earlier or later than that, Woody Woo also mentions it's a book, I think. Which admittedly, now with that in mind, it does kind of look like a book, because if you look under the right arm, it seems to be that there's another fold of the book as well.
Oh, okay.
It makes me think of
looks like both. It can be both, but that's great.
I don't know where in the Bible it is, but it makes me think of a line that I'm somewhat familiar of, which I think it's Jesus speaking to his disciples, and he said something about rejoice not that you have power over the spirits and demons, but rejoice that your name is written in the book of life.
Oh, well, thank you. What's the name of the comment? The woo-woo person? Thank you so much. That's exactly what it is. Because later on, there's references to Moses and so on in the next card. So I believe that that's exactly what it is. Because somehow the other one didn't. But
yeah. I say also because the book of life, seems like something to rejoice, but here it seems more like a book of death.
Well, definitely. And I love the comment about asking about the dance, because then I look, and I've been noticing this the whole time. This is connected to the cerebellum, and the cerebellum's function is coordinating movement and balance. And it basically cognitive functions like language and attention in movement and balance. So all of that with the book and the dance really fit to the connection to the cerebellum, the little brain behind the brain at the base of the skull there.
Yes, that's interesting. And also keep in mind that this is Northern Europe, and the commentary, there's the Catholic power in play, and there's the Protestants. So they're making commentaries on the dominant religion of the time, which a lot of the players were not necessarily enlightened, and there was all kinds of debauchery going on under the hood of the so-called ecclesiastical sacred doctrine. So keep in mind that I think this is a play on that, as the Northern Europeans were trying to say, what all you people are corrupted, and we're trying to do something, and we're going to move away and do something different. So this has that. That's why there's the commentary where they're bringing out all the faults of the current dominant religion at the time. So yeah, so I believe that's a book. Yes, thank you so much. I had not made that connection, but I just got this book not too long ago. So great. How exciting.
Shall we go to the next card?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one's a juicer. So, excerpt quote from the German: "Of plagues and divine retribution, he who feels that God punishes too oft and plagues us with will and malice, from him the plague is less than a quarter-mile distant." In this woodcut image, a lone fool gestures in consternation as a plague, COVID, of locusts and frogs is sent down on him from heaven. Moses and Samuel look on from heaven, unmoved by the fool's pleas for mercy. Moses wears the horns ascribed to him by medieval tradition, derived from a misreading of the Hebrew word raise. So here, since the shift, this all carries the point being that a shift needs to be made when the card comes into play. And unless it hasn't been made through, and this is a mature card, it keeps maturing, meaning that they've gone through all these different stages of being, and they haven't been able to get in touch with that where they really want to be, in the integral presence that liberates and creates freedom. And so how multiplication here, because they keep multiplying with their desires and their errors and whatever else they're multiplying things, eventually, if they're not used with the eye of the integration of spirit, it becomes toxic. So the plague has begun. And so this judgment card is different than most judgment card, because, it's not that everyone is already dead, but he's on his way. So it's real. Death is here, and I'm part of the cause. And I'm trying to access liberation, and up there, they're not paying any attention because I haven't been shifting, and I'm somewhere distant from being able to do that. And unless I do that, this is all my creation. That is the creation of multiplying without foresight and integration of all the aspects of being on board, which creates a balance of decision, or a balance of making the shift in order to become more holy. I would say holy because this deck is making commentary on the powers at the time, which were religious in many ways, associated with religion. So he's trying to get free, but all that multiplication is not causing freedom, because it's based on desire and whatever else, and all the greed and everything else that's behind it. So he notes that, and Now, now here it says that Moses wears the horns ascribed to him by medieval tradition, derived from misreading of the Hebrew word for raise. I don't know, but horns, it's almost like the devil is also seated there, but the devil was only there. It's a concept created. It's a figure that's telling you you're not looking because of this representation of desire, which I represent. You're not looking inside. Inside is where the light resides, and I can't help you. I already live here. I have it in, and so and the other person, and Samuel. I'm not. When it came to religion, I'm Catholic, but I did not really study the scriptures. But anyone have any thoughts on Samuel?
Sadly, I know nothing of Samuel.
Okay,
I don't
well,
either, actually. I don't either.
Mm.
I do think it's good that you brought up the inner world, because I noticed that the castle here, or house as it were, is a very minor visual character way off in the background, whereas typically it's a little more middle ground in the background, and he's looking away from it, and looking up into this inner world of the two characters that are flowed together across the middle.
Yeah. I think that, their hands are in gesture. The one with the horns has open hands, and the other one's hands are folded. So one is to get the other one with the horns is still say, yeah, well, I tried to show him, but still the fool has not able to make the shift. And so because of multiplication, too much of whatever it was, plague was created. Too much without, of course, a proper balance or the whatever it takes to create life that's blossoming and it's integral.
Well, I think that they're both in meditation. If you look at the left hand of Moses, his index finger is touching his thumb. So it's just two different forms of meditation hands.
Mm-hmm.
One that's up and open and one that's closed. And so there's really the both and of inner and outer that are both inner up there.
Mm-hmm. But he's got the horns. So it means that maybe there's got to be something about the horns that he was the one that was open. Perhaps he was opened enough to involve himself with humanity to try to teach the fool to, rise to his potential of divinity. But, it hasn't happened yet. And the other one was already in seclusion, in touch with their inner being. They weren't perhaps in the world. I don't know the story of Samuel, but he is obviously like a yogi seated in pose.
Yeah, I can supply a little bit of information via Wikipedia about Samuel. It says, Samuel was a figure who, in the narratives of the Hebrew Bible, plays a key role in the transition from the period of the biblical judges to the institution of a kingdom under Saul, and again in the translation from Saul to David. So, and also he's venerated as a prophet by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So it's interesting that, he's plays a key role in the transition from biblical judges and judgment into the establishment of a kingdom.
Okay.
Obviously, that period of judgment, contributes to the overall meaning of the card. But
I'm glad you brought that up, Nicholas, because then he becomes the one who is the confluencer, since he's accepted by all the different religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he doesn't have
true, but I think generally speaking, tons of the biblical characters are, have their place also in the other Abrahamic religions.
Certainly.
But on the topic of horns as well, it's quite interesting. admittedly didn't really know that much and had some speculations, but in looking into it, apparently it had something to do with a erroneous translation on the part of Michelangelo, where he translated the word, I believe, Karen in Hebrew, which has something to do with horns, but also has to do with the shofar, which is a literal horn made from a horn, blown on a specific holiday, which I don't know that much about, but that's just revealed from a basic Google search.
Like I can speak about that.
Okay, great.
It's interesting when we look at Moses's hand, there is a Jewish prayer that the rabbi or the priest will do, and it's called the Priestly Benediction. And in that, the two fingers and two fingers are held together and then separately. And you saw that if you ever saw Mr. Spock, he does that on Star Trek, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yes. And but the thumb is held to the side, and only the high priest is allowed to say that prayer. So they can hold both hands that way. And as far as the horn is concerned, the translation was from the word ray. They mistranslated from ray to horn. And so people think that Jewish people have horns. And I can speak to that directly from experience I have. I have a friend who's was a teacher, and she wore her hair wrapped around her head. And the students asked her, "Is that so you hide your horns?" So it became from a mistranslation to people actually believing that there are horns on Jewish people, which there are not.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it also has another part where we're going through a plague now, but during the holiday of Passover, we have this plague of frogs and locusts. There are 10 different plagues that come down to us. And every year at that holiday, Passover, we recite all the 10 plagues. And it's very real now because of what we're going through. So this is even though maybe from the 14 or 1500s, the concept of it's what we're going through now.
Well, thank you for elucidating. Because in the text, it mentions it clearly. Right.
Yeah, I also just want to say, I mentioned this when Gilda and I were speaking earlier, and I'll mention this and see how, if or not it contributes to the meaning of the card. But I know in some reading that I've done, it's one particular account that apparently, Moses, when he was a child, was, for lack of a better term, somewhat of a kind of dumbling, an unassuming child that apparently had a speech impediment and was rather small, rather slight. And, I think that more or less he was considered something of a fool himself. So it seems like there's an established parallel between the fool's horns and those thinking Moses to be somewhat of a fool himself, and then Moses in the sky with his horns as well. So, like I said, I don't know if that really contributes to the meaning or not, but it's something that came up and may yield some kind of meaning.
Well, what I heard is, Moses did have a speech impediment, and in order to speak to people, he had to practice speaking with marbles in his mouth, so he could learn how to be clearly understood. So I've heard that too in the tradition. I've never read it in the Bible, but this is a story that I've heard all my life. So it seems to make perfect sense.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. I did not read that from the Bible either. I don't know the Bible that well. It may be in there, it may not. But I did read that from some Kabbalistic literature that, kind of served at a different point, but it seems applicable to this as well.
Well, I also like the point that Jordan made, and with reference with what Nicholas just read about that Samuel embodied all the different religions. So in a way, he's pointing out here that some kind of shift can be made in which, everyone is invited.
Well, Marilyn, you brought up the mistranslation of the horns, and now I'm starting to look back and wonder if this whole fool's headdress thing, regalia, started with that way back, where it's almost like a head glove for two horns, and
You're right.
and and historically, then I'm going back to go, wow, I know so many texts where one key mistranslation, for example, St. Augustine's a big one with the pronoun. I won't go into it, but cascades forward to create a whole set of erroneous stories that then get copped into culture and actually do a lot of damage.
But why they're never stopped is beyond me.
Well, no one knows, because the literacy level back then, very few people would translate in Latin or Hebrew or even write. And so people believed what they wrote. In a sense, it's like news media now, that if you got a bum story, then it just continued. And people spoke it as if it was the, God honest truth kind of thing.
Well, there's a particular, the Hebrew language is extremely unique in and of itself, but there's also just kind of the age-old problem of transliteration, where you can take the example of something like Zeitgeist in German, and it translates to spirit of the time in English, but Geist doesn't necessarily translate very neatly as spirit. But nonetheless, they then contribute to our understanding. And it's, one is definitely made to think of the Tower of Babel and the confounding of the languages, and kind of gives me this image of a time where, I don't know, I don't want to veer into semiotics, but where language more accurately represented what we mean or what we are attempting to image with language.
Mm.
Anyway,
yeah, so this card
Well,
is very...
it's a huge topic. Even St. Augustine miswrote the Latin to say, I'm that, in the mistranslation of the pronoun, instead of in whom. And that really is where original sin started to cascade out as a thing and become this, deadly. But it was supposed to be in whom. And what would happen is then it's present, but not because of that, it's naturally born into you. I won't go into it. There's a whole book on the origin of Satan, but it goes into how St. Augustine mistranslated a pronoun, and the way that the implication cascaded forward. Almost everyone then, look at this original sin stuff, but it didn't exist until then.
So it's similar to what we're living now, where it's not even only one noun. It's just every other minute, every other sentence that gets put out. Nobody really knows in whether it's true or not. And so it's very apropos that when I saw this deck, I said it's telling us, we're in a similar situation, which is really interesting.
Well, completely. And the old quote of paint dries, language never. So language is always evolving too. So people get a bad translation, but they pick up the ball and run with it. And it creates whole, like as Nicholas said, the transliteration issue. It's just really interesting to go back through history and see where words changed. Even was it I can't remember her name now, who did a presentation last year on the loss of the divine feminine. It was literally lost in translation, from Chokmah to Sophia to Pneuma to Logos to Spirit to Sancti. It went from divine feminine times 2 to neutral to masculine to this higher octave masculine, and sealed the fate even in language, just with one word. And
it's amazing. So I think I have a next page. This one's a bit lighter.
If I may, there's one other thing that
Okay.
I'm surprised that I didn't think to mention this earlier, but if we think about the character and life of Moses, right, he's the person that we get the 10 Commandments from, or Mosaic law. And I think it's also really interesting that on the one hand, from, I guess, if you were to say, like, from top down, that's okay, and it's a code of ethics or conduct for us to live our lives by. But if we consider it from bottom up, it's something really to be judged by as well. You're missing
Yeah.
the mark of the Mosaic law.
Yeah, so that's where judgment comes in here. So thank you for pointing that out. And also, he, if I place myself, how's he seated? He's on the right. And the right is also the right, the right that makes laws. The right side is the rational side of things. So through judgment and rational laws, and whereas the Samuel is on the left, in the more feminine, opened, right brain, faith. That's why I believe that eventually, perhaps, I'm not sure, from 21 it will move to 25 or something thereabouts, and it will include faith, charity, hope, or these the things that bring the heart in connection with the reason.
Something I just noticed is that he's in the posture of the magician. Now he is like holding a hand up to shield himself, and he's being pushed down a bit. But there's the heavy weight of the responsibility of inner divinity. Or another way, Milan Kundera, the unbearable lightness of being, is kind of in that as well, where he's the eye in the storm.
Yeah, you're right with the heavy weight, because in the next card, 21, he's holding the world over his shoulder like this in a round circle, which, appears to be quite heavy. So living in also only with the laws and the right way of, that only without having the compassion and the heart added to it becomes heavy. And I will show you the card if I can pull it up, so that you intuit that really well, Jordan, because, within the spirit of the commentary of this deck, by the time he gets to the world, is not like happiness ensuing. It shows a shift, but it's heavy on him. And I will show you the card. You can see it.
We can't see it very well at all.
Well, you see that there. See, he has this. He has this. This is a round ball, and the round ball is right on top of his the back of. You see it now?
A real atlas.
Right.
I was going to say, yeah, it's a real atlas image of carrying the weight of the world.
Right. So it's in the spirit of the commentary of the whole deck. So he's carrying it here. So it's not like in other decks where everything, and by the time you get to the world, there's rather a communion and everything is together, birth, transformation, and communion is all there. But here,
it's interesting too that world is connected to his cerebellum again, just like
it's right here. Yeah,
the yoke that. So he grew a tumor of the world, or he grew the world. His whole world is of his own carrying, as it were.
Yeah. He's carrying the world on his shoulders, on the back of his shoulder. And so it's there. So it's interesting that it also makes reference to that area, which is where the, medulla oblongata, the whole area that shifts the brain. So the shift. So here's wrapping it up. It's pivot. All these cards are pivot is the word that I used. And the pivot is not just a step, it is a major shift which needs to occur. And it's major because it is embodied, meaning that you cannot continue living this way. You have to embody another way, or else the peril continues in enormous ways. And there's even death, because you have those trenches that it's interesting how they use open trenches there on earth. And when the fool falls, it has, the grave is already dug. So yeah.
Well, and you make a great point there. I think now I've really enjoyed the presentation with the pivot, because then you've really kind of pushed forth the notion that literally by changing direction in a single step, you can totally reorchestrate and reestablish a new momentum in a new direction and change a whole life in one single step.
All right, so we're at a point here where we should probably get through this final slide and then conclude. So
yeah. So okay. So I had just included this other deck. I wasn't sure exactly how time would go, but because the card number 5, the Hierophant here, is shown, and it's a early deck based on a classic tarot from 1735. He's not wearing any hat, just like the other deck. His hands is near his heart, and the two people in front of him are kind of abstract. So it means he's not even sure on who he's addressing, but what he's sure is that he's humble and that he needs to bring his heart into the sacred space where he's offering advice as a Hierophant. So, and we also, the devil here has eyes on his knees, eyes on his belly, the two breasts, and then, the regular. So it shows that these centers are also not just junctures, they're actual centers of union that cause shifts. So all these shifts need to be on board in order to get loose from the chain that the devil has. And in the Judgment card here, the last one, the fact that the youth that are being born, the middle one is is not the same color. It's still kind of empty and blue, or imagine that the thought is blue and that is unformed. So they're calling something that's not yet unformed that also needs to shift. It needs to be embodied in order to create the shift. So that I just wanted to show this Hierophant because he's not decked out and he's got his hand close to his heart. So at the beginning, some of these tarot cards did not include a lot of the things that have been layered through time. So can we go to the next one, please?
yeah.
So this one's on the lighter note. This is a picture of Brian Williams there in memoriam. He died in 2002, and he was a jolly fellow. And he had, he was in the tarot community, and 3 goddesses where he thanks in this memorandum, he thanks the 3 goddesses before. Mary Greer, Mary Greer is a tarotista well known, is one of the 3 goddesses he thanks. And in turn, one of the goddesses wrote this after he died in memoriam, wrote this. He was a jolly fellow, and he wrote this poem for him. Prayer to Santo Briano, full of grace, to bring a blush to the oracle's face, tie us up in leather and lace. Lying in the lap of Eros, surrendering to Thanatos, you whom the gods hold close, guide us in wearing wisdom's glove, look down on us from above, lead us to the door of love. Living in a house of trees, tempting Mephistopheles, possessor of the handsome knees, delight in beauty, joy in pain, pour your blessings down the rain. Santo Briano, tie me up again. So we thought we ended with this lovely poem. And so that shows the humor and the environment in which he enacted this deck. And I had a surprise for Skip, who's here right now.
Yeah,
And we brought Ezra Pounds because there's a movement of poets that call themselves in the vein of Ezra Pound.
Yeah.
And the mentor who I learned my individuation from, Jung, he was trained by John. He had analysis with John Peck for 12 years. And John Peck is an Ezra Pound poet. And John Peck is one of the editors of the Red Book. And that's what I wanted to share with you.
And I'm wearing the right T-shirt for that story. You know my connection to Ezra Pound, right?
No, I don't.
See that?
Ah, okay.
Ezra Pound went to my college.
Is that so? Is this
Yes.
synchronicity or what? I mean,
Well,
he
it's
went
a historical fact anyway.
he was cuckoo, and then he went after a while and was put in jail because he was attacking all different groups of people and so on. But he did start in trying to bring forth and break the norm of the metronome of poetry, which United States has done in music with jazz and all of that. So, but it wasn't well received for many reasons. But
Not at the time, yes.
so Americans are responsible for all of these movements, which are they're not yet recognized as actually and happen in art, music, and poetry. And I mention that because I write poetry, and I've written, and my meter is whatever it comes to me. It comes to me. I don't follow any meter. And yet it works. I never knew about Ezra Pound. I've never heard of Ezra until I finally made the connection with my mentor. And he said, oh, yeah, John Peck was an Ezra. Oh, really? Oh, so that means that we're living in a society and a country that carries a lot of innovations that are yet not quite put together. And maybe some of this can come up for the venue that you're organizing for next year. That poetry is also part of
possibly
the rhythm of things.
Sounds like an interesting proposition. You'll have to do it. I always found Ezra Pound putting me to sleep, but I think he won the Nobel Prize for Literature or something like that. I mean, it was just
So
He influenced.
I think so.
Do you say he influenced so many famous poets and writers, including Hemingway. And Hemingway has a quote that Ezra spends his time. He honored him, and he also said that and not only does he, the ideas were all wonderful, but he said that he stood to be knifed, meaning behind the back, stabbed by those very people that he helped.
Yeah.
Well,
this was said
Ezra
by Hemingway.
He was a complex character too, because he was very much fascist and he supported Hitler, and then they wouldn't try him because he's a little off his rocker. But so the U.S. forces just put him in a steel cage and then sent him to I think a psychiatric hospital for a little while. But Hemingway famously made the concept that any writer or any poet in my era who does not think they were influenced by Ezra Pound would do well to present in court that they went through a blizzard without feeling the cold. And I mean, he was in complete respect of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Complete disagreement with him, but the influence was uncanny.
He was in touch with what Jung found out, what Jung realized, that individuation, that point that I was trying to make through the whole presentation, where the daemon comes in and you are on. from every angle, and it doesn't matter which way you go. It's not about the numerical matrix. It's about being guided from.
And right, and for the listeners, here's the DAIMON is the daemon you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, with that, I wonder if now is a good place to call it.
Good.
This is a great presentation tonight, Gilda.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Gilda. I just have one question though. What if you didn't know that Ezra Pound had gone to my college? Then what was it that made you want to tell me about Ezra Pound? I'm curious.
Because he was an editor in the Red Book. And
No.
because and you are Jungian, and because you're Jungian, and he's one of the 3 editors mentioned in the Red Book.
Not Ezra Pound, but
No, John Peck.
John Peck,
John
who was
Peck.
a
And John Peck,
follower of
yeah,
Ezra
he has several. He's from Stanford, and he's older now. And there was a whole group of Ezra Pound poets that graduated from Stanford.
Well, what is a synchronicity is that I wore my shirt tonight.
See, that's
Right.
amazing.
And now,
So
now that
yes,
it's on video, it's an historical fact.
It is
So-
a historical fact.
so
no
I
doubt.
never knew, but I lived my life, and I'm a poet. And when I was in front of it, I said, "This is exactly what I do. This is exactly what goes on in art." And in America, that has not ever quite been recognized. I have another quote, but I didn't bring all of that. I had that in the presentation. I took
yeah.
it all out, where it says that it's a quote about the British, that they, they didn't like Ezra in many ways, and this and that and the other thing. And they said, because Ezra said that, the Brits only acknowledge something new arising after the artists are dead.
Right.
Okay.
So Justin Case just made a good point here. He says Ezra Pound was nominated for the Nobel Prize 10 times, but never got it. He was awarded the Bollingen Prize for poetry in 1949, though.
Bollingen Prize, so Switzerland.
That's
Well, look at that. I never knew anything about this. Just the whole thing
which
trickled down.
relates to Mary Conover Mellon and all that jazz. So because this was a prize that she cooked up from the Bollingen Foundation, and then she died. She died early. She died in 1946, but somebody that was following after her awarded this prize to Ezra Pound. Now
Yes.
I remember that. That's what it was. Yeah. And
Yeah. I also read that they weren't in agreement in giving him the prize because of, he attacked so many different groups about, the way they did things, not really, going to causing harm or anything, but just wanting to change the way things were being done. And so since they weren't, and he made some statements about the British women and this and that, which I wrote down because they're really so, the words that he used were so right on. And, but they were, kind of, they were sophisticated the way that Oscar Wilde will discuss something that's totally derogatory, but he will tell you in very beautiful words.
And Annabelle can probably speak to the fact that Ezra Pound was editor with a capital E. He would never not correct anyone. It was just, he'd rip it right off, and it wasn't rude or tactful. And it wasn't a Churchill, tell someone to go to heck and make them look forward to the journey. He just fired the cannon.
Right. And
Yeah.
he often compared, he said the American women to the British. He said the American women were, which is part of his style. They said what needed to be said, and where the British, he didn't like when you said something like, in this hot, cold winter day, But, when you made references that were ambiguous, he wanted you to kind of like, even though the rhythm is spontaneous and synchronistic, but he wanted the words to be precise.
All right.
Yeah.
Respectfully, given the absence of anything related to tarot, I'm going to be checking out. So if we can't
Okay.
conclude,
Thanks very
Okay.
much.
Well,
Nat.
thank
you,
you,
Gilda.
Nick.
Thanks,
You did a
Nick, for the
beautiful
indulgence.
job.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
of course.
everyone, for being
Great
here. And
gratitude.
Nick, what's on for next week? Is it Jordan? No.
I'll do a presentation next week. The following week, I believe that Jordan will do one, and then
August
Raquel will
9th.
conclude this series. So
Yeah.
we should
Okay.
end in the next 3 weeks. So
I'll tell you what, this has been very, very helpful to me because
Oh, great.
Cool.
because this treatment that I'm having is breathtaking. I mean,
yeah,
the actual treatment is nothing per se, but the prep for it every day for 5 hours is breathtaking. So
Oh,
it's been a pleasure for me, and I think everybody has enjoyed it,
Yes.
both the viewers,
Thank
you.
and people who've attended, and hopefully we can do it again. But for
Yeah.
everybody who's watching, please keep our captain in
Keep reading
your
Dream
thoughts and
Faith.
prayers.
yeah, thank you very
say
much.
the
And
incantations.
I'm gonna have to look
Very
up Ezra Pound on Wikipedia again. Gilda, now that
Make,
you
make,
mentioned
yeah,
it.
and make sure you read. Also, there's a link. Maybe I'll send it to you from the Poetry magazine, and both are really very different. Different kinds of reviews.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Gilda.
Okay.
Thanks,
Great.
Thank
Nick.
you. Thank you for
Appreciate it.
coming.